Welcome to Pittsburgh Earth Days, The Dirt Podcast, featuring Grant Ervin, live from the Point Park University Center for Media Innovation. Here is your host, Grant Ervin.
Hello and welcome to The Dirt, where we talk about all things sustainability here in the city of Pittsburgh. I'm your host, Grant Ervin, Chief Resilience Officer for the city of Pittsburgh, and glad to be here today with everyone and all of our listeners across the local region as well as across the nation, as we're starting to pick up a couple of listeners throughout the U.S. now. We're coming to you from the Center for Media Innovation at Point Park University, and want to thank the crew up front for helping to bring us this great studio space, as well as their technical capabilities in recording the sound today. We are here with our guest, Snehal Desai from Evoqua. And Snehal, before I just introduce you, you are the Chief Growth Officer for Evoqua. You are my first CGO. And so from a CRO to a CGO, I'm really excited to kind of dive into that conversation.
Very good.
But welcome to The Dirt. How are you today?
I'm great. It's a bit of a rainy day, but I mean, it's fall, so it's supposed to be, but really glad to be here, and did not know what was in this building, much less on this floor. So also nice to get a chance, being a little nearer to Pittsburgh, to see what's what here in downtown.
Awesome. Well, since we're going to talk a little water today, we figured we'd called the rain.
Thanks for dialing it up.
We dialed it up, and we're like, hey, we're talking. Let's make it happen. So we want to thank the weather team for making that possible for us today. So just to jump into the conversation, Evoqua, local Pittsburgh-based company. You guys are right down the street, so friends of downtown Pittsburgh. Mm-hmm. But maybe to dive in a little bit, tell us about yourself and kind of your journey to Evoqua.
Sure. So, I'll give a little bit of background about Evoqua in a second, but maybe just talking about what brought me to Pittsburgh. So I'm not from Pittsburgh. Born and raised in Michigan. And
a Michigander?
I am a Michigander, and I did go to the University of Michigan, and I am a Wolverine. So for any Nittany Lion, at least it's Big Ten, okay? So it's all good.
Go blue.
But
go blue.
Yeah, absolutely. But grew up in Michigan, went to school there, and ended up graduating with chemistry and chemical engineering background. But as I learned throughout college, there was the idea of working in a lab, working in a plant, didn't seem like it was completely going to be my thing. So had an opportunity to join Dow Chemical, which is a Michigan-based company, and joined in sales. And as it turned out, my very first job in sales as a technical salesperson was in water treatment. I was driving at the time, it's the late 80s, from power plant to, pharmaceutical facility to, cities, talking to them about technology and hoping that they had an interest in converting, et cetera. So spent a pretty long career there. So at Dow, and then somewhere along the way, I did a bunch of other things, including moving, lived in Chicago, lived in Michigan again for a while, and then ended up in Minneapolis, which is where I was for 15 years before coming to Pittsburgh. And the role that I had in Minneapolis before I left was leading, at the time, what was Dow's water and solutions business. So very much core technology. And as it happened, one of our biggest customers was Evoqua.
Interesting.
So having the opportunity to lead that business, I also had a chance to build the relationship with the incoming management of Evoqua, because there was a transition. And so that just kind of set the stage for, right time, right place, right opportunity. And that in early 2018 is when I joined Evoqua as the Chief Growth Officer. And I just, as a little aside on the title, so at the time, Evoqua was going through a process of whether they would go public or whether they would potentially be acquired. And I had a great conversation with our CEO, Ron Keating, and Ron said, look, if we go down the path, if we end up getting acquired, well, somebody's job is to grow the business, but it probably won't be the people that are actually in the management team. Right. But if we go public, there's an opportunity for us to really kind of change the trajectory and inflection of the company, and it'd be nice to bring somebody in that knows the industry. So as luck would have it, the company did end up going public and brought me in. And what we brought under the one tent are a variety of functions that most companies have, but to do it all in one place. So research and development, our corporate development and M&A activities, our R&D. But beyond that, it was like digital was just starting to take off. How do you digitize your business, and how do you offer digital solutions to your customer? Strategic marketing, brand and communications. And so it was really kind of bringing things together in a way that will allow us to prioritize and then focus on what was important and drive that holistically rather than just spreading it out in the company. So that was
it under one kind of
brought it under one roof, under one person, and that's been great. And it's like a very unique opportunity, and I'm very thankful for that kind of opportunity, because having run businesses before, I like to say now I'm getting to work on the fun stuff, or the stuff that I like to work on.
Finally.
Yeah, finally. And just as fast forward a little bit, as we started to dig into sustainability, it's around 2019. A couple with my interest and passion for the area in general, but also just kind of the nature of the role, and it's market facing, customer facing, investor facing. I increasingly was asked and wanted to be more involved in sustainability as we were crafting the strategy. So it doesn't have it in the CGO, but it also includes oversight for sustainability as well.
That's awesome. And probably a core piece of the business too, right?
Absolutely. So yeah, actually talking about Evoqua, for those that don't know, Evoqua Water Technologies.
Kind of a fresh name.
It is, and that's really part of the story. So the business itself at one point happened to be part of Siemens, and big German conglomerate, and was based up in by and large had operations in Warrendale, and we're all over the country, but it was in Warrendale, and
just north of the city.
Just north of the city here. And when Siemens decided they were going to sell the business, private equity came in and bought it, AEA investors, and not more than probably short period actually, they hired in a management team to come and run it. And it just so happened that the person they brought in to run it, who's our current CEO, had a history having lived in Pittsburgh in the past. He was at Kennametal and had spent time here. So they gave him a choice on where would you like to, have the company headquartered, because you could literally move it anywhere. Right. And he said, had a good experience in Pittsburgh, like to come here, and built a team.
That's amazing.
Around Pittsburgh, and then made a real important decision to move from Warrendale into the city. So we're based in the K&L Gates building. And the intention was, number one, to commit to the city, and number two, to have that urban environment to allow us to attract employees and talent and such. So it's been a great experience. But, Evoqua today is a name that, at least in the water industry, is known. And funny enough, more and more becoming known here in the region. Yeah. Although it is kind of funny when you tell people and they're like, what is that? So we are a leading provider of water and wastewater treatment solutions. So when you think about water, it's where it comes from. You got to kind of get it somewhere. So that's the transportation of water. Yep. And then you have the treatment to get it from a quality of X to a quality of Y, depending on what it is you're trying to do with it. And then ultimately, there's a waste component of treating that water once it's been used in whatever fashion, and being able to
industrial or municipal,
and then you have the opportunity to discharge it or increasingly reuse it. So we provide technology, solutions, services around that value proposition of treatment and taking care of equipment once you put that in. We are over 100 years old. We operate in, most people think about water and they say, gosh, that's, must be drinking water and wastewater, which is a part of it. But, if you look at the profile of freshwater use in the U.S., like 70% of it's for ag.
Wow.
Another 15-20 is for municipal, as we think about drinking water, and then another 15-ish is for industrial. So, it's always kind of fascinating, and we don't do a lot in ag, but we absolutely are involved on industrial and municipal, and we participate in a lot of end markets, and the importance of water in those end markets is what we have really started to craft our story much better. I mean, we always did it, but we're crafting that story in a better way. So a couple of examples. So drinking water is drinking water, and that's an absolutely critical space. But we are involved with remediating sort of the source waters that might have emerging contaminants at them. So PFAS is fast rising on the national agenda. We are one of the leading solution providers to tackle that issue all over the country. And then, of course, wastewater is also something that in municipalities there's quite a bit of infrastructure, and the infrastructure bill is a hot topic these days. But we're in over 200,000 installations, with our technology being a part of what they're doing to treat water, and that's just on the municipal side. When you think about industrial, think about the quality of water that's needed to make a microchip. It's called ultra pure water, meaning you can't have anything in it. No salts, no contaminants. It can't be anything, because as the chips get smaller and smaller and more finite, even a tiny microscopic non-detectable particle will cause them to have a problem with that chip. So we provide treatment technologies that get it all the way down to what we call ultra pure water.
Okay.
It's called 18 megaohm. It's a technical term, but fundamentally what that says is there's no resistance in the water. It's just pure. It's probably one of the most aggressive solvents ever.
Is ultra pure water.
Is ultra pure water. In fact, it's the kind of thing you don't want to drink it, because it just takes everything out of you.
Oh, wow.
Because it's pure. It doesn't have anything in it, and it wants to absorb minerals. That's what water does. So anyway, that's an application. We actually provide treatment technology inside a lot of the sterilization rooms in hospitals, because before you use instruments for any type of surgery, you have to make sure that it's completely clean. We provide that to, like I said, a number of hospitals, VA, etc. And we do that through an outsourcing program where we take care of all the water, charge them by the gallon,
and
make sure it's running. Food and beverage plants, both on the beverage side for what goes into the drinks, as well as increasingly on the wastewater side in a food factory where they're trying to take care of their waste. But in some cases, they're actually looking to get value from their waste.
Right.
And I think we'll talk about that, which is the area of, anaerobic digestion, biogas production. So, like I said, it's a fun job because water's not water.
It's so dynamic.
And whenever somebody says of the water industry, water is in every industry.
Right.
And it shows up differently. But it's fundamental to every one of them. And so that's really the mission we're on, is really to focus on employing our technologies, providing our expertise, enabling customer sets to be able to help them achieve their goals.
If you could go back for something, you said something that's really interesting, and I was learning about this a little while back. You said that Evoqua is a 100-year-old company at its kind of roots, and maybe if you could break that down a little bit, because, and saying what you have just laid out is, I think, fascinating to me, because Pittsburgh has a deep history in water purification and water-based technologies. And so there's an ecosystem here. Could you talk a little bit about that history and that ecosystem and why Pittsburgh is so important to it?
Sure. So going to the 100-year-old history, we have a few brands in our portfolio, namely on the wastewater side with our Envirex brand, and then also our Wallace & Tiernan disinfection portfolio.
Okay.
These have been around since the beginning of treatment technology. I mean, one of the biggest innovations, this is over 100 years ago, was the introduction of chlorine as a disinfectant, right, to make water safe for drinking. And basically, if you're going to treat it X and you travel, say, a mile, anything can happen in that mile, but you need to be able to provide some level of continuous disinfection and protection in that water. And that was really one of the innovations. And today we still rely on that technology, by and large.
That was created 100 years ago.
100 years ago. I mean, it's gotten better. We're not Romans and aqueducts and sand, right? But we still.
That's the foundation.
That's the foundation, and fundamentally, as it relates to our consumptive water, our municipal water, there's a risk tolerance. You don't want to take on risks unnecessarily because you're talking about human health. So if it's tried and true, the motivation to change that is not great, and you don't have to. But there have been some improvements along the way. So when I think about that history, and then I think about even Pittsburgh as a region, because of industry as it was here, because of the population as it was here,
Mm-hmm.
and frankly because of sort of the nexus between industry and population,
Mm-hmm.
and the need to ensure that there was a level of quality,
Mm-hmm.
for well-being. I think you found the adoption, at least early days, of some of these technologies to be able to build the infrastructure and to be able to support a thriving community while you also have industry surrounding it. And then that actually ends up being, if you look around the world, the pockets that are trying to balance that, right? But I think Pittsburgh sits at one of those nexus where, because of the forefront of industry being here in Pittsburgh with the steel industry particularly, and the community that we were trying to support, it's kind of a tenuous balance, right?
Because you have you're using the rivers, like the rivers are working rivers.
Yes.
So you have industry alongside them, but it's also the place where you're getting your drinking water.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah.
Exactly. So I mean, that's really where you see the I think of Pittsburgh that way, having not been here prior,
Mm-hmm.
but kind of paying attention to the landscape. Many places where that connection came, like Chicago is another one.
Mm-hmm.
You rely on the lake, you rely on the river, you rely on the flows, the way they go. But you're using that for both the source and for industry and what it's doing, as well as the community. So I think of that as being the opportunity. And it's really where we see some interesting dialogue going on in watersheds, because everybody lives in the patch, right?
Yep.
Water is very local.
Yep.
Different than carbon, as we're talking about this around targets and goals and things. Carbon's a very universal term, and you can start talking about climate change in a very universal term, but water becomes a very local thing when it comes to what can you do.
People relate to it too, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So it is something that we do. So anyway, just like I said, the headquarters for Evoqua is in Pittsburgh. We have 4,000 employees, probably about 300 or so here in the region. But we operate in 10 countries, 160 locations, serve 38,000 customers, over 200,000 installations, as I mentioned. And really what we think about every day is what we have as our purpose, which is transforming water and enriching life.
Wow. Now, what are some of those product applications? I mean, that is a huge footprint that you guys have. What are some of those direct products that Evoqua was providing to either municipal or industrial customers?
So just categorically, I think probably makes the most sense. So we have a suite of filtration technologies, and that's usually anything from taking out what you and I could see in the water, affectionately calling frogs and logs.
Okay.
Because they exist. You don't just put a pipe into the river and hope that for the best. So you have increasing degrees of filtration. And then once you get through that, you actually have things you can't see, like dissolved solids. We have a series of purification technologies that really help us tackle that. And then I mentioned disinfection, right? So that's really kind of the basic building blocks. And building on top of that, then, as you think about wastewater, there's a variety of steps that you take, settling and separating, et cetera. Ultimately, you get to sludges and things, and there's where some value might be created. So you have digestion technology, mostly biology and bacteria, that you are either using to reduce that sludge so you can do something with it productive, or liberate energy from it, like we talk about biogas. And in some cases, nutrients, right? So what gets in that sludge is oftentimes things that you could make value from. So we have categorical technologies that really make us probably one of the fullest suite. And not everything is ours. I mean, we apply technology, we make technology. And then the other thing that's unique is how we deliver it. So traditionally people buy capital equipment and you write a big check and you install it and you run it. Increasingly, what we're finding is, number one, if there is a problem that a community has, and they might need an answer tomorrow, how do you get it to them tomorrow? And we have a fleet of mobile assets that we can bring in, and it's happened more than once where a community might be, a really good example of this right now is around PFAS. So
maybe for our listeners, explain.
Yeah,
PFAS.
so PFAS is a class of chemicals, forever chemicals, and people might have heard of some of the news on this, but it's showing up in pretty much everything. It was associated with some of the coating technology, like firefighting foam. And so it's showing up at Air Force bases and airports. It was also part of some of the nonstick coatings that were on various household goods and clothing, etc. So it's now that we're looking for it, we're finding it, and we're finding it in a lot of places. And so there is legislation, regulatory, working its way through the EPA that will start to put limits on that, and then you'll have to treat for it. But once a community finds out, so you can wait for the regulation to land, or what you find out is political pressure will change a mindset in a heartbeat. And so in communities where they have found this chemical, right away, consumers are really looking for solutions. They're not wanting to hear about a bond and a technology
how it's
3 years.
Be treated.
Right. Yeah. They say, talk to me how you're going to fix this tomorrow. And so we've had more than a few situations where we can bring in on trailers carbon, which is a real adsorbent technology to take that out of the drinking water, or maybe resin, which also
this
does
is like
the same.
activated carbon.
Activated carbon.
So like a giant Brita filter, basically.
Essentially, yeah. You're really expecting the bad stuff to stick to it, and then when it's full, you deal with it. But at least you're taking out of the line of fire, which is a drinking water source. But to be able to do that when people call is critical. So we have a fleet of mobile assets, and then we have another way that we deliver, which is we basically, and this is a lot more in the industrial space, where a customer says, "Look, we would love to put a water reuse system, circular economy, save a bunch of water, get after energy," but it's complicated, right? I mean, people, the technologies you're using, the ability to keep it up and running, it's complicated. So oftentimes we'll do this as a build, own, operate, which is we will put in the capital, and we'll run it 5, 10, 15, 20 years. Lets the customer do what they do, which is make a microchip, make an iPhone, make Frito-Lay potato chips, whatever it is, right? Let them do them, and we take care of the water. And that's increasingly becoming an interesting value proposition because of things like shortage of labor, the complexity, and sometimes it's just efficient use of capital. It's like they'd rather put that investment of capital into something else.
Where they use it as a different type of procurement mechanism. They don't want to own the capital asset, but they would rather have a service provider.
Yeah, I mean, I think of the world really in two ways. There's the part of the water industry where water is the product, and I think of that as municipalities a lot. And then there's the rest that have water as a means to do what they're trying to do. It's in that second category that we find more of that dynamic of, why don't you do this for us because you're experts, and we'll go over here and do what we do. And that's increasingly becoming more of an interesting dynamic for us and for customers. So it's good.
You see a lot of this. There's a conversation, a guy that we've had here at the for several different symposiums through the University of Pittsburgh, Michael Weber. He's a professor at the University of Texas at Austin, I believe. And he talks about the water energy nexus.
Yeah.
And so you guys are really at the epicenter of that.
We are, and it's funny. What is old is new, but that term probably 5-6 years ago, you could, water energy nexus, water food energy nexus, water food energy climate nexus. But the bottom line is it's all interconnected, and when you think about water energy, you really can't have power and energy without water. By and large,
and the vice versa,
and vice versa. So you think about our traditional coal-fired power plants. Of course, they really needed water for steam generation and turning those turbines. But even today, in solar, those panels don't clean themselves often enough, right? So you have this need, and oftentimes they're in arid regions. So you then would have a collection system, and you want to reuse it. You got to filter out all the stuff and reuse it. We see a move toward traditional petrochemical refineries that are transitioning to biofuels. And as they transition to biofuels, they are reliant on, say, a different quality of water that might need inside operation. But then ultimately they have a wastewater problem. That's different. It's not a petro-based, it's something from plants. And then, we talked about this other one where the ability to generate power from what is trapped carbon or energy that's in a wastewater sludge. And so we're able to utilize our anaerobic digestion technology to liberate that. And when I say liberate that, you're basically putting sludge, and I'll be kind because it's after lunch, but it's sludge. And
there's
but
thousands of other names.
There's
for
thousands of other names
Yeah.
for it, and none of which we use in our commercial brochures. But
The marketing people put a
yeah.
stop
Well,
on
it's
that,
good
right?
news is I have something to say about that too, so
Yeah.
I don't let that go out. But the bottom line is that the carbon that's inside that sludge
Yeah.
is you can, with bacteria and biology, you're able to generate, the bugs eat the sludge and they generate the gas.
Right.
If you capture the gas, it's able to be reused, and it's called renewable natural gas.
Yep.
And it's getting a tremendous amount of play in certain voluntary markets in California, in Vermont, and other places where industrial customers,
Yep.
oftentimes others, are seeking that as part of their mix of energy source. So, I mean, that's just another angle
Yeah.
of the water industry and how it's playing into the energy side, not to mention the amount of energy it takes to pump water
move
from
the water.
just to move water
Right.
is an expensive proposition. So the ability to connect decentralized microgrids with decentralized water treatment and having them coexist as opposed to centralization. There's a lot of things happening.
What do you see? I'll give you a question here and then kind of break down a little bit of the context. But what do you see as the opportunity to bring those worlds together? Because it's very a lot of the challenge is to knit together exactly what you just laid out in a business case.
Mm-hmm.
And we've been able to see this here in Pittsburgh for on the water treatment side, for example. We have an energy consortium that we've pulled together called the Western Pennsylvania Energy Consortium, which is a cooperative buying platform for local governments, really bolstered by the heft of the Pittsburgh Water and Sewer Authority. So, God willing, 24/7, 365, they're always pumping, they're always moving water. And that energy consumption allows us to drive down price because it creates predictability. And with that, we've started to move now into a wholesale market where we can buy power even cheaper and then start to purchase locally sourced renewables.
Sure.
So that's one kind of component of the story. The other, though, is on like wastewater treatment. Where we have partners like Alcosan, 83 municipal consortium that everybody knows in the region where Alcosan's located at the base of the Ohio River, but has had a difficult time making those transitions into kind of that anaerobic digestion space or circularity with some of their waste products because of cost prohibitions or perceived cost prohibitions. Sure. So what are some ways, to encourage this types of innovation in that municipal space or even in the industrial space? Because the same thing exists. Just one final example is we're part of a network called the Renewable Thermal Collaborative.
Okay.
And same thing. It's a number of universities, municipalities, as well as industrial partners are trying to rethink heat. And it's a fascinating conversation because they're all trying in their own way to reduce their carbon impact, provide economic solutions, but also, find ways to intersect this type of innovation. What are some of the things that you have seen be successful from Evoqua's customers to help make these things happen?
Yeah, so it's a great, very complicated, but actually,
I'm asking for a friend, Snehal.
It's a never ending opportunity set, right? So maybe take that in a couple of ways. So number one, what we've seen as a condition for success around the world and here in the U.S. is a confluence of a set of demand drivers that are seeking low carbon energy sources. And that may be to meet a city's goals or a company's goals, but there's something that's driving them. So,
a target.
A target, yeah. And they have set those targets, and now they have to find a pathway to achieving them. What that then has introduced is an economic incentive, whether it's through voluntary markets that let's say the BTU of gas coming from some traditional sources versus this greener source. There's a value to that, which is the economic signal to those that are sitting on that resource, like an Alcosan, to have a reason why they would go in and get an ROI on putting in technology. Often enough for us, what we see is it's those combination of economic driver and a goal-driven, objective-driven situation that's leading to people employing technology that way. But I can tell you that, I mean, look, in the last 5 years even,
totally transformed.
the number of communities as well as companies that are seeking those kinds of resources versus how much there is really has put a demand signal into the market that is undeniable. The number of wastewater projects that we do, which ultimately have some semblance of, number one, I can no longer just treat the water as if it's a pass-through. I need to tackle the water that's coming in, treat it, and potentially recycle it. So that's number one.
So going back to that full cycle.
Because they have a water issue too, right? I mean, in some places they either don't have they aren't able to get more, or they are just being more mindful of how they're using water. But when they did that, they used to not be able to get an economic return on that either, until they found out, number one, they had to pay more to discharge it. So like, well, if I'm going to pay for it, why don't I just recycle it? Because I mean, now all of a sudden there's some math coming in. But what's really been fascinating is that other piece was, once you recycle water, what's left behind is this energy-containing remains. And traditionally, people would say, well, I'm just going to land apply that, or just I'll bury it. Or they weren't doing anything with it.
Wasting the asset.
Wasting the asset, but they were wasting it because in the absence of any economic value, what's the point? You're just injecting more investment. So I think what we've seen now is particularly food companies are really on this. And they do it for the same reasons that a farmer would sell. I mean, I remember, living in Chicago, calling on customers throughout the Midwest, these large agribusinesses. They don't let any part of corn go to waste, right? They monetize it all. Well, the same could be said for anybody that's sitting here operating a facility that has these assets, these things they've invested in, like a sludge, and they're not letting that opportunity go by. They're starting to tap into the energy content, the mineral content, et cetera.
Because it becomes energy, fertilizer.
Absolutely. So I think that's really some of the changes we've seen is these ways of thinking about this as a business economic question, because it's an environmental question, no doubt. But you need economic drivers to get people off the dime in the absence of regulation and mandates, which, frankly, the movement we're seeing now is thoughtful. It's not a rush. It's not saying I have to because I have to.
Right.
I want to because there's a need. There's an opportunity and there's an incentive. And I think that's what we're seeing. So in the case of Alcosan, I mean, look, if the job is to go and liberate natural gas out of your sludge, but you're competing on par with available gas coming from shale, it might be a challenge, right, to see that.
The economics don't.
Yeah, well, you have to invest in it, right? I mean, and while there's investments in both, it's an economic question. But if there are customers that are seeking a portfolio, because this is not about one or the other, it's about a portfolio, right? If you don't have enough available alternative low carbon energy, then you have to put a price on it that's differential to get people to invest. And I think if that's
like a carbon credit or
something, something that motivates those that are into putting the money in the ground, that they're going to get a return for it.
That's awesome.
But I mean, that's an opportunity because we're seeing some of that happening. And what's really interesting, I mean, we have an example in Milton, PA, it's more toward, I believe, Harrisburg. I'm still kind of getting my orientation. I still think of the world as this way with Michigan, so I could always point my hand. Yeah, it's over that way. But oftentimes what happens is that, so we design our municipal wastewater facilities for humans, right, for the kind of things. But oftentimes that's also where small and mid-size, like food producers or craft breweries or you name it, they're also sending their waste there. Well, what we're finding is that, our systems weren't designed for that kind of waste. They usually have higher organic loads. They're just different, right? They're different.
Different biosolids.
Right. So living in Minneapolis, they had a really fascinating program that the state had sponsored. They had like $2 billion they set aside. And fundamentally what they called it was the Industrial Pretreatment Program. And what it was the Met Council, which is a lot like Alcosan. They ran like 55 wastewater utilities. They had money from the state to first target where was this high strength coming from. Oftentimes it was from food and food processors and producers. And they would have an incentive to go and work with them to invest in advanced technology at the source so that it would reduce the load downstream.
That's smart.
And they said, well, because once it gets to us at the central site,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we're trying to solve every problem under the planet.
Right.
But some problems are harder to solve than others. So if we can be smart about our investment, this is kind of getting to the point of with an infrastructure bill and money that's coming out of D.C., can we do something different?
Mm-hmm.
And the do different would be we absolutely need to invest in the infrastructure, but can we be smarter about where we put those dollars to have the most impact? And I thought that
To
was
find those co-benefits that exist
right,
out
right.
there,
Because
sure.
you know, by the way, that food processor is a tax rate, is a tax base. They'll keep paying a higher charge, right? But at the end, it doesn't solve the problem downstream.
Mm-hmm.
So if you invest in the technology, by the way, some of those technologies being like anaerobic digestion that can be put into a brewer,
Mm-hmm.
they can also generate green energy. They might use it to offset their own energy costs. They might sell it back to the grid.
Mm-hmm.
They've now become part of the solution
Right.
rather than just a payer, right? So those kind of schemes, I mean, we would love to engage with any and all that are having those kind of conversations here, because that's a more holistic view of how you tackle water challenges,
Yeah.
energy, and the opportunity from it. Because it's not about a problem. It's about could it be converted to an opportunity.
You know, let's put a pin on that, just because it would be great to follow up with those conversations, because, you know, as we've developed the Pittsburgh Climate Action Plan, which is now 3 years old, so we passed it through City Council in 2018. It's opened up our eyes for exactly what you're talking about. There's a volume of co-benefits out there that could be created when different system actors talk to one another.
That's right.
And so whether that is, you know, the energy and water space interacting like we've been talking about, or transportation and energy, or the other big confluence that we've seen is like the ICT networks, you know, so broadband and technology, in that if you don't have that underlying broadband capability, it disables any future types of intelligence that you can build into your system. You know, so whether that's sensors or water monitoring equipment, or we've been doing a lot of work in facilities, for example, where we're monitoring, you know, energy consumption at half-hour intervals. And so, you know, creating the ability to do adaptive management process, right? Demand response tools, those sorts of things. And I think that would be really fascinating to look at that at a systemic level. Before I get too nerdy on those sorts of stuff, just to take a step back for a second, you know, one of the things that's really fascinating about a company like Evoqua for me, and the work that we've done at the city, is this intersection with the Sustainable Development Goals. And so, you know, water obviously is an industry, but it's also a value-driven industry from an ethos standpoint, as well as economic. And I'd be really interested to hear your perspective about how you've kind of broken the SDGs and the sustainability program that you've developed at Evoqua, you know, as a relatively old but new company, in quotes, how you guys are stepping into this space in terms of sustainable development goals, corporate social responsibility, et cetera, et cetera.
No, it's a great question. And I'm going to give a shout out to a couple of my colleagues that are here and about, but Julia Saint and Laura Alston, both Chatham grads, by the way.
There you go.
But between the two of them and a number of folks in our organization, people showing up at the right time always helps. But you know, I maybe kind of tackle this in a couple of ways. First of all, you know, if you're in the water business for as long as we've been, you just kind of assume, well, we're in the water business, so of course we're sustainable. And that's absolutely true. But you have an opportunity to be able to describe that in a way of the so what. And so, you know, 2 years ago, we really embarked on a journey to sharpen our understanding of sustainability, and ultimately to translate that into what does it mean to us and what should it mean to those that we work with and our stakeholders. So we conducted a materiality assessment, and what that did is set the context for what are the things that we should be doing. One of the things that came out of that was how do we line up to the SDGs? Because water is just a piece. So like we know SDG 6 talks about clean water and sanitation. That's the obvious one.
Right.
And is most connected to what we do when we talk about transforming water and enriching life. But There's a whole piece in there on SDG 3 on health and well-being. Well, we're thinking about macro trends right now that are driving our business. Climate is a huge one. I mean, water will be one of the ways that it manifests itself, whether it's too much or too little, the quality, the quantity, systems that can handle floods and droughts, et cetera, right? So we know that the climate's a big one. Health and wellness is another big mega trend. And we know that we influence that through the disinfection technologies, the quality of water available, et cetera. And also the third one, just to kind of round that out, is connected. Is having an environment that's connected, the systems like chips, et cetera, that are being built, but also we are connecting our systems to make them more intelligent, to be able to adapt, for us to be able to take care of them in a predictive way, not in a reactive way. But we know that, health and well-being, that's 3. Renewable energy from wastewater, that's an opportunity with just a renewable piece inside in 7. We're built on innovation. I mean, this stuff doesn't
doesn't magically show up.
It doesn't just magically show up, right? So, we've invested heavily in R&D and our digital offerings to continue moving that. And then a biggie, we talk about it, it's funny, probably like 5-6 years ago, I spoke at an event in D.C. Sponsored by the U.S. Chamber Foundation, and they were talking about circular economy, which traditionally that's talking most often about, solid wastes and plastics and things like that.
Materials.
Yeah. Well, I did this whole 8-minute shtick on, and I say shtick because it took a lot of work to get the organizers to accept that water was part of the circular economy conversation. And now, mind you, this wasn't that long ago.
Yeah. Right?
But what the premise being is that's the ultimate in circularity. Now, I mean, the water cycle is circular. And so we were like, all we're talking about is compressing that cycle through technology so that we can have what we need when we need it and not wait for it. And so that's a big one for us. And we know we tackle that. And like I said, climate sits in there. So, I mean, up and down, one of the things, and I would encourage anybody that's interested to visit our website at evoqua.com. We're continuing to mature our sustainability story, but in there you'll see our sustainability report. And our team has done a really great job of laying out which of the SDGs, our different bodies of work, how they map into that. We know there's also a huge element of that related to our teams and our organization. If you think about ESG, I've talked a lot about the E.
But the S and the G are just as important.
S and the G are just as important. And from an S perspective, we're getting our arms around inclusion and diversity, both for our workforce, but how we're helping and partnering with our communities as well as our customers who are tackling some of these same challenges. You may know that I actually happen to be on the board of the U.S. Water Alliance. And one of the big programs there was the water equity work. And I know Pittsburgh was one of the seven cities that was part of that, which was very cool because I met Will Pickering 3 summers ago. And it was just around the time he was here as an assistant, and now he's in his seat. But that was right around the time when this whole work was starting as cities were starting to think about what to do. But, water equity is a big thing and how we can play into that. The S part. And then the G part, we are substantially more educated now. So our board has oversight to our sustainability goals. We just presented to them about what we're talking about from a target setting part of view. But it's on their agenda.
Yeah.
And increasingly, investors want to talk about ESG. They would like to understand what we're doing. And like I said, our way of thinking about this is a handprint and a footprint. Our handprint is what we do when we enable our customers and communities, et cetera, with our technologies and services and solutions. And then there's our footprint. So how we operate, right?
Your impact.
And both of those matter. And as a traditional water company, you might have actually thought more handprint. It's what we do. But the footprint matters. And we're taking a lot more diligence on trying to get that really well understood. And honestly, what's coming, and you can see it, just like we are rigorous with SEC guidelines on how you report financials, how companies report their sustainability performance is going to find the same kind of rigor. And so you got to be ready. And that means you have to be really thinking about the numbers. You have to think about what is the validity, the assurance that what you say you're doing. And so, it's early days. It's a really interesting time to be involved in this transition.
It's interesting you say that too, because you're spot on. I mean, it is early on, because I think a lot of us in the sustainability space, are just finding our place and defining our value within our organizations. Like, it's always, I think a measurement has always been at the core of that, trying to prove why you need to be sustainable. So data collection and the like. And I've seen this in our own work within integrating the SDGs and then also developing an ESG policy for our pension fund. What's been amazing to me in that work is how all of a sudden people are starting to galvanize and gravitate to it. And so where it used to be the sustainability department was its own little thing off in the corner, or a special project, you're now starting to see other departments and components of leadership recognize what their connection and value is to that.
Sure.
Have you seen the same with your board and your employees?
Yeah, absolutely. So all of that. So the board, it's kind of a question mark right now, but right now ESG is being addressed by no less than 3 committees. At our executive team, I mentioned handprint, so our business segments are thinking about it from an innovation and what we do for customers. I happen to lead our kind of central team as we kind of pull things together and disseminate it out. We have a person that's overseeing operations that includes our fleet and how it touches everything up there. And then, you can go deeper. And, we created a steering team that's got representation from a handful of different groups, including our investor relations, our human resources,
Super
legal, and then this core team, and then 5 work streams and those kind of, it's exactly to your point. It's a huge team sport, right? Huge team sport. But just getting everybody up to the same level of understanding, and then also helping them understand their role and being able to help make that next level change is really, really important. And so I would tell you that's my team has doubled, at least doubled from a central staff, but more than that when you kind of connect all the people that are involved now. And I think those
start deputizing people.
Well, you have to, right?
Yeah.
You have to, because at the end of the day, it's very difficult. This has to be part of your fabric. One of the big things we did at least 3 quarters ago is we established sustainable as one of our core values in the company. And it was met with a huge amount of interest and fanfare, and really important for our employees to see that show up so high. But that sends the right message to the organization that says this is important.
Yep.
This is important for a lot of reasons. But it's important because it's what we believe in, and then that shows up differently for different people in the company.
It influences people's work, I think, too.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's one of the fascinating things about it. Do you, we're coming up on time here. I want to be respectful of your time that you've been so gracious with to us. Maybe a couple nuggets of wisdom. What do you see coming up ahead, both for Evoqua, but also in the sustainability space? What are some things that people should be looking forward to?
Yeah, well, first of all, there's always something changing. I think for Evoqua, what I'm really excited about is that we're changing the lexicon of how we talk about what we do. And the most exciting part of that is exactly to what you said about helping our own employees understand the purpose and knowing that it's more than what we've done, which is delivering very, very credible technology and solutions. That's critical, right? But just recently, we dimensionalized the fact that we treat over 1 billion gallons of water. It's those kind of things matter to people.
Yeah.
Or the fact that most of the hospitals during COVID, we were having people go in and out, keeping those facilities operating. A lot of the testing facilities, we were providing water for analyzers who were doing the testing. The vaccine manufacturers. We're trying to bring...
You're part of that supply chain.
We're trying to build, the impact, right? So we're moving to impact. And I think impact is really what I think a lot of folks in the sustainability space have to be thinking about.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you talk about, well, I reduced this much solid waste, I did this, there's a so what in that,
Mm-hmm.
right? And that so what isn't just to tell everybody else how great you are. It's to tell yourself why you're doing good.
Yep.
And how you're doing good. So I would tell you that there is, and like I said, there's a regulatory framework that's coming.
Mm-hmm.
That to me is going to happen.
Has to.
And it's happening partly because Wall Street's asking for it too.
Mm-hmm.
And it's amazing that will change a lot of things, but it's going to put rigor in. And you're going to have a lot of folks moving out of the hand waving and the bullet point space. And then they're going to move into the show me. I think you and I talked about this before we started, about the directness of some folks, particularly from Europe.
Yep.
So on the topic of ESGs and sustainability, as we talk to investors around the world, the demands of show me, prove it to me, tell me what you really have done, not what you're going to do.
Mm-hmm.
That's actually a very different conversation, because they've moved past the we intend to do something, and now they're looking for action and proof. So I think from a sustainability point of view and an ESG point of view, both investors, employees, stakeholders in general, they want to see what are you doing rather than what are you going to do. And that's what we're designing around, is to show that we're the impact piece. The impact piece to us is critical.
Yeah.
But it's hard work. It's
an evolution, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's the thing I always enjoy about it. It is, as long as you set up with yourself with the understanding that it's a continuous improvement process, that there is no end.
Yeah. Absolutely.
There is no mountaintop per se, because there's always another mountain that you need to climb and continue to advance that.
Well, I think that in a nutshell, that's water too.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, our challenges are opportunities at the same time, and through all the things that are changing, climate included, the state of play is never static.
Mm-hmm.
And so being adaptive, being agile and resilient, I mean, our systems have to do that. We have to do that to be able to deal with what's coming.
That's awesome. That's some great advice. Sneh, I want to thank you so much for being here with us today and sharing the work of Evoqua. Also want to thank Evoqua for being just a terrific corporate partner and leading the way in terms of sustainability here in Pittsburgh. And I can have a sense there's many more conversations to come, because I got a whole list of things I want to ask you here in the future. So
very good.
We appreciate you being here on The Dirt with us, and we welcome you back anytime.
Absolutely. It was my pleasure, and appreciate the opportunity.
Excellent. Well, thanks everyone for listening in to this episode of The Dirt. We have some great nuggets of wisdom here from Snehal Desai at Evoqua. Thank you to the friends here at the Center for Media Innovation and Earth Day Pittsburgh. This is Grant Ervin. Thanks for listening in, and we will talk to you soon. Take care.